I've just spent my first 2 weeks riding the 2019 Stumpjumper 29er, and I'm ready to give my first ride review. Now, 2 weeks is not a ton of time on a bike, but from my experience, the first impressions can tell a lot about a bike. I want to start off by mentioning a few things that I did not mention in my first look video. First of all, this bike comes with a riser bar. A lot of long travel 29ers will come with a flat bar, but I like a riser. I like the feel of it. The bend, the sweep is just a more natural feel. I did not mention in the first look video the actual suspension travel, even though you can go online and check it out. The front has 150 and the back has 140. Now, if you get the 27.5 version of this bike, which is almost identical except for the fact that it comes with 27.5 inch wheels, that comes with 150 mil travel in the back. Now let's talk about riding this bike. So this review is going to be the tale of two chips. And yes, I'm talking about the flip chip that comes on this bike. It comes with it in the low setting, so with the head angle a little bit slacker, the bottom bracket a little bit lower. My first ride on this bike was not extremely positive. I felt a little clumsy. You sit high off the ground on this bike, higher off the ground than any other bike that I've ridden. And honestly, I felt a little bit awkward. A little bit clumsy on the tight corners. The bike felt pretty big and cumbersome. I did actually not like the front tire. It kind of had a floppy on-off feel when I was riding the bike. And I felt like I could not slice and cut this bike into corners as quickly as I was used to on other bikes that I've ridden. Now, I ride trails that are pretty tight and twisty, and that characteristic of being able to cut in and out of corners quickly is something that's really important, and it just was not intuitive when I first jumped on this bike. So after my first ride, I made two adjustments. One is I flipped the chip. So it steepened the head angle by 1/2 degree, and it raised the bottom bracket by about 5 millimeters. Also, I moved the stem down 1 spacer, so lowering the handlebars. Both of those changes, along with probably getting more used to the bike, made my following rides much better. First of all, the front end went from feeling like I just had to work to manage it to feeling like I could kind of use the momentum of the front tire as more of a weapon, so to speak. So Specialized has this fork at a 51 millimeter offset, and I think they do a really good job of having the bike feel really stable, but also very agile. I also actually like the tire. Instead of having that floppy on-off feel, steepening the head angle and maybe even dropping the handlebars a little bit gave me a lot more control of this tire, and it did not feel like it flopped into a corner. It felt more controllable. And speaking of the front wheel, this bike, you can loft the front wheel a lot easier than you think you could. In fact, it's just as easy, if not a tad easier, than my 27.5 inch trail bike, which is kind of surprising because when you're riding this bike, it looks like that front wheel is just sticking way out there. But if you lean your weight back and just kind of loft the front wheel, it's really easy to manual. Now, as you can imagine, this bike carries momentum like a freight train. It carries momentum better than any other bike that I've ridden. And after I got used to riding this bike, I felt like it was actually fun to learn how to use the momentum of this bike and get the bike through the corners quickly. And you can get this bike through a corner quickly as you get used to the riding characteristics. It's one of those bikes that really takes time getting used to. It was not a natural feel. I did not jump on this bike and just feel completely comfortable the first ride. And when I was on that first ride, I was thinking, you know, is it the big 29 wheels combined with the 2.6 tires? Is it the slack head angle? And I think it's honestly a combination of all those, because when I'm on my cross-country 29er, that bike is extremely agile, and it has a 120 fork, but it has a lot steeper geometry. But the more I got used to riding this bike, and you know, flipping the chip I think made a pretty big difference too, but after I got used to this bike, I started to have more and more fun on this bike, and again, using that momentum to your advantage. Now, I will say, when you're riding steep trails, so we have here in Florida, those kind of trails that they drop pretty steep and then you have to climb and grind up them. If you lose your momentum going up those climbs, it's a little harder to get the momentum back compared to a lightweight 29er cross-country bike or even a long travel 27.5 inch trail bike. It just takes a little bit more effort. However, if you learn to ride this bike, so when you're going down a hill, give an extra crank. It's learning to use the momentum of this trail bike. So the real advantages of this bike for me, other than the momentum, is just the feeling of flow and smoothness and stability that you get on this bike. I was watching a video on Alex's channel the other day when he was riding in Colorado in a kind of a long, rocky, loose trail that did not have a lot of turns, and I was thinking that is like the perfect trail for this kind of bike. Now that being said, I also feel like once you get used to the handling characteristics of a bike like this, you can still corner it pretty quickly on those tight turns. Probably quicker than you would imagine, and it was definitely quicker than I imagined. Something else that I want to mention is this bike gets over square-edged routes better than any bike that I've ridden, and that's important to me because I ride in areas where we have a ton of roots, and a lot of times you're coming up a hill, there is a square edge route that could really slow your momentum down, but this bike just gets over those square edged hits. Another advantage that I found with this bike is the lack of pedal strikes. I absolutely love my 27.5 inch Trance, my long travel trail bike, and this bike does a much better job at not getting pedal strikes. In fact, I don't think I've had a pedal strike on this bike when I was riding it. The Trance, to me, that's one of the only downsides to that bike is, you know, it is lowered to the ground, and I like that feeling, especially when descending, but you can get pedal strikes. So because this is a 29er, the bottom bracket sits a little bit lower in relation to the axles, and so you get that feeling of being in the bike with the advantage of not having the pedal strikes. Specialized claims that this bike is 20% stiffer than previous Stumpjumpers, and although it's been a while since I've owned a Stumpjumper, I have owned several many years ago, but I can attest that the stiffness of this bike is superb. It really helps this bike feel more alive and more agile and active than it would be if it were not quite as stiff. Also, the pedaling efficiency on this bike is excellent. It definitely pedals better than any other Stumpjumper that I've ridden. And this shock feels more firm in the mid-stroke than my Giant Trance. Now this video, I'm not going to do a lot of comparisons with that bike. That's coming up. But it is worth mentioning that that bike feels a little bit more plush in the mid-stroke, whereas this bike feels a little bit more firm. It also feels like this shock will resist bottoming out a little bit better than some of the other bikes that I've ridden. Something else that I really like about this bike is the position of the lever for the shock. So that is pretty much locked out. That's fully open, and that's kind of your pro pedal setting where I use most of the time when I'm trail riding. But this lever is super easy to reach. It's not way down here like some of the other bikes that I've ridden. You can easily just reach up and grab this lever and flick it over. So I find myself flipping it over to the open setting a little bit more often. So the SWAT box is something that I absolutely love. It's a no-brainer just to keep your stuff in the bike and not have to worry about putting anything in your Camelback or your jersey. Just to head out, you've got your tube, you got your pump, you got your multi-tool there ready to go. The only quibble that I have is the water bottle holder. So it's a little harder to put a water bottle in this. I've been using standard water bottle cages for so many years that to do kind of a side entry of putting the bottle in is something that's not real intuitive for me. Also, it's designed to put the water bottle in from the right side. Now, I've trained myself to use my left hand, which I recommend because that keeps your right hand on the handlebar to operate the shifter, and more importantly, the rear brake. So if you were having a hand off the handlebar, reaching down for a water bottle, and you had to grab a brake, you want to grab the rear brake in that situation. So that's something that's obviously pretty minor, but I just wanted to mention it. A couple other quick notes before I end the video. I do like this saddle. So the saddle is very comfortable. I also have gotten used to the command post. So even though in the first look video I said, you know, I wasn't sure about it, it shoots up quicker than any post that I've ever ridden. And it's not infinitely adjustable, and you cannot modulate how it rises up. However, that being said, I don't mind it because a lot of times when I have the seat post down and my quads are burning and I want to sit down as quickly as possible, just to shoot that thing up and sit down, it's not a big deal. Shifting on the bike for the first 2 weeks is absolutely flawless. No issues with shifting. The only slight issue I've had with the bike is the front tire is just not holding air. So I don't know, and I've got Stan's fluid in there. I'm gonna add a little bit more, kind of shake it around. So I don't know if there's a small hole, if it's the way the tire seats into the rim. So to sum up this bike, I can say that the advantages are incredible momentum, but yet a bike that's fairly agile and playful, especially for the size tires. Not only the 29er tires, but 2.6. I mean, that's a massive tire that a few years ago would just be kind of a freak bike. Now, it's kind of standard for these long travel 29ers to put tires this wide. So fast, smooth, flowy, smooths out trail chatter, goes over square-edged hits. And it's also a bike that the faster you go, the more it comes alive and the more advantage you have over maybe a smaller wheeled bike. So like I said, I'm not going to do a lot of comparisons yet with the 27.5, but I will say there's still a place, in my opinion, for 27.5. When I jump back on the 27.5 trail bike, I really appreciate the increased agility of the bike, just kind of being able to maneuver it around easier. Some people are still going to like that. I'll just say that right now. Which bike do I prefer? Honestly, I don't know yet. I've got to get these bikes up to the mountains because that's why I own a trail bike, is for riding up in the mountains. I do like it on the rougher Florida trails, but getting up in the mountains is really why I have the bike. So that's really going to tell me which bike I prefer. It's honestly a toss-up at this point. Now, I did do a time trial on this bike and the other one, and I will be posting that video within the next week. That was fairly interesting. So that'll wrap up this first ride review of the 2019 Stumpjumper 29. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do so and hit the bell so you're notified whenever I post further reviews of this bike, because like I said, I'll be doing other reviews and also comparisons with the 27.5 inch trail bike. Questions or comments, drop them below. Thanks for watching.